All right. Mark Repke, thanks for coming on. Super excited to have you, man.
Glad to be here.
So, to start, why don't you give me a little bit about yourself, and then we can kind of get into your full story and kind of what made you blow up online.
Okay. Well, as my story that I tell in my speeches that I generally give, a 14-year-old girl went to a 4th of July party and unfortunately was the victim of rape, and from that came me, a guy who's worked in the pro-life movement one way or another most of his life, and has worked for candidates who were pro-life. But I'm the sound guy for the pro-life movement. I'm not somebody who actually really shares my story normally. I'm just the guy that makes other people sound good. So really, for me, sharing my story has only happened in the last 3.5 years or so. Basically, since the Dobbs decision was leaked, was one of the early events after Dobbs was leaked that I was confronted and kind of don't want to say urged, but kind of inspired to share my story from that.
Yeah,
But
that's truly an extraordinary story. And I would challenge you in saying that I think urged is probably the right word. I don't know what your feelings are faith wise, but I think the Holy Spirit works in crazy ways. And I think urged is
absolutely.
probably the right word. Nudging from God with all of the impact that you've made so far.
Yeah, people have said some nasty things about the person that said that to me, but I say that I believe that God put her there to get me to tell my story. So absolutely, I believe from a faith base that there's a plan for things when they happen, and that sometimes God definitely uses evil to turn to good.
Yeah.
So I truly do believe that.
I had seen the video that had gone viral shortly after that, and I think a lot of people have seen it now, of you at, I'm not sure what event it was,
So
but
the one with me in the red Choose Life
yeah. Take
sweatshirt
me back to
is.
that day and kind of explain the circumstances around what happened there.
So that was about 6 or 7 months after the Dobbs decision. And every year, the day before the March for Life, Frank Pavone with Priest for Life has a prayer event at the Planned Parenthood in D.C., and I do sound for that. And that was in 2023 in January, and the event was over basically. Frank Pavone had basically shut down the event. He was done. If you notice, the sign off of the podium is gone, and it was winding down. But I was just called. There were so many death scorts there that day, and so many people heckling and saying nasty things to us that day. I felt compelled to share my story, and since it's my PA system and my podium, I just stepped up and I shared my story. And fortunately, a couple of people were recording. One was just a small time person that within the pro life movement who shared it with a few pro life groups. And then luckily, one of the other people who recorded it was this guy off of TikTok who posted it and shared it with Breitbart, and it went viral. It's now, I mean, just in the places that I know of, it's over 10 million views worldwide.
Yeah.
And that is worldwide. A senator in Brazil reposted it. So there is a Portuguese language overlay of me telling my story in front of Planned Parenthood. So it's amazing that if you listen to the call and you answer, amazing things can be done.
Yeah. I've personally seen the video probably half a dozen to a dozen times throughout the years. I never knew exactly who you were, and it was most recently when I asked you to come on. It was that day that I saw the video again on somebody had reposted it, and I saw it again. It was, like I said, probably 10 to 12 times that I've watched it, and I was finally like, I would love to know who this guy is. Unfortunately, they tagged you in the post. And I was like, I have to get this guy on to hear his story. And I had no idea that you even are helping work on campaigns and stuff like that. Tell me more about that.
So I grew up in Iowa, and if you know anything about presidential politics, Iowa is the first in the nation caucus.
Hmm.
And so from a very early age, I was involved in presidential politics, volunteering on campaigns. When I was 17, I was the national youth chairman of a presidential campaign. And then when I got older, I ended up working on political campaigns. When I was 20, I think 24 years old, I was the state campaign chair for a presidential campaign. Uh, then after that, came to Washington D.C. From Iowa, worked on some campaigns out here, and then I started getting into more organizational work and more behind the scenes work. I'd much rather be the guy that organizes events than the guy that speaks at an event. That's just, it's always been my strong suit, is the logistics and planning of things. I did a number of bus tours for pro-life groups with Susan B. Anthony List, with Lila Rose, with Family Research Council and some others. But those kind of travel logistics and planning and being the sound guy, that kind of came in. I was doing travel logistics for a crew filming a documentary in 2013. And at the end of that trip, we had bought a sound system for them to use for events during their trip. Well, at the end of the trip, they couldn't afford to pay me. And so I took the sound system as my payment. And since 2013, I've been building up more and more sound systems. If you can see in the background, I'm kind of cramped in around here with sound systems and stages and everything else to be able to do events. And that kind of became what I do, is I'm the guy that makes everybody else be heard. And so, I got out of the more campaigning and political stuff because that takes a toll after a while. It really does. Living 6 months here, 6 months there, it really can affect you after a while. And so when I hit my 40s, I kind of decided that a little more stable lifestyle. But that does not mean that I don't travel. In fact, for live action, when they came to me last minute asking me to be part of the video that's just been going around the last couple of weeks, I have started to suffer from severe claustrophobia. And I had not been on an airplane since I started suffering from the claustrophobia, and so I didn't know that I could get on a plane safely. So I ended up driving from the Washington, D.C. area to Los Angeles to film that roundtable discussion. But I felt it was important, and so I was very happy to be able to do that.
How does the claustrophobia start?
I don't know.
That's
A year ago, I flew just fine on an airplane down to Florida to buy a new vehicle, and I had no problems then. So sometime between then and March, April, I think it might have been being in an MRI machine that was very claustrophobic that triggered it. But now it's something that it's a new challenge late in life to I don't even have to be necessarily in a claustrophobic situation. I just have to think about a claustrophobic situation and I start getting heart palpitations. So it's definitely a new challenge.
Yeah,
But
certainly.
but
What
I was able to
advice?
get some I was
Yeah.
able to get some medication, and I flew on a plane within the last month to go to my dad's 80th birthday party in California. So at least with medication, I'm able to do that.
That's good to hear.
But I was in Boston a couple of weekends ago, and driving through tunnels felt like it was
Yeah,
closing in.
I can
So
imagine.
it's definitely a new thing. I'm not going to say I've never been claustrophobic, but it wasn't ever affecting me really to that level because I stayed out of situations that made me claustrophobic.
Yeah, certainly.
But now it's just thinking about it being claustrophobic is a whole new challenge.
Everybody, let's take a quick break. I want to tell you that this episode is brought to you by Cowboy Revolution Apparel. They have amazing hats. I love all of their apparel. And if you go to their site right now and use code VALIDStudios, you'll get 15% off site-wide. I love all of their stuff. It's super high quality and it looks great. People will ask you about it. People will comment on it and compliment you all the time, I promise. So go get yourself a hat and let's get back to the episode. What advice would you give to somebody that that wants to get into politics or be on campaigns and be involved and maybe someone that's in it right now that, as you mentioned, are kind of getting tired of the burnout and want to get out of it and move into more of the planning side of things?
Well, you have to make a very clear choice to be in it. And I think that's the problem is there's a lot of people that don't want to be in it. They want to be near it, but they don't want to be in it. And I think it's kind of like following Christ. There's people that go to church and, oh yeah, I'm a Christian. I go to church a few times a year, but I'm not in it. I'm not sharing my faith. I'm not doing what I need to do to be in it. And I think that's the thing with politics is you have to make a real commitment, because if you don't, if you try to live outside of it and inside of it, it really, I'm not going to say you can't be effective, but I think you're less effective. I think the people that really have a calling to do that need to look at it as a calling, and to make those sacrifices to do it. But you also have to know when to punch out. You know, I waited too long to have, you know, a girlfriend, a wife. I'm now well into my 50s, and I just don't see that as anything that's probably going to happen to me, because I spent my 20s, 30s, and 40s traveling around the country, doing events, working 7 days a week, 16, 18 hours a day, to be successful in that realm. But that's what it takes in a lot of cases. Now so much is done on social media. I think there's a place for people to be kind of at the periphery, running social media campaigns and things like that, where you're not the guy on the ground. But I was an advance guy. I went to every single event before the candidate went there. And when the candidate was there, I'm the one that knew the way into the building, the way out of the building. I knew where the exits were. I knew where the nearest hospital was. I knew what the problems with the room or problems with the venue were. That's just part of doing that job, but it changes the way you look at the world. Yeah. I did so many bus tours over the years that every bridge I go under, I look at the height requirements. So, I mean, you just kind of get it ingrained in your head, and then it's there. So you look at things differently. Even now, I walk into a room at a hotel, and I think about, okay, well, how do I get out of here with the headliner if there's an issue? Where is the safe space to go to? But there's all kinds of different aspects. I think, people who deal with the press, that's a whole other thing. You have to watch every single word you say, because in this day and age, it's going to be replayed 100 times, 1,000,000 times, 10 million times. If you make a mistake, it's there kind of forever, and it's immediate backlash on it. So again, it's a vigilance of a different kind. So I think you just have to be committed. You have to be in it.
Yeah. I just had Scott Bryson on, who was a member of the Secret Service for 5 different administrations. And one of the things we discussed was, well, let me back up a little bit. His page now, what he does is he's more so focused on telling everyday people, this is how you can stay vigilant. This is how you can stay prepared for these different situations. And what you said just reminded me of like being aware of all these exits and having to always, having it ingrained in you that, you're always ready for things to go down and things to go south. So it's really fascinating to me. And I really hope that one day, I hope that I get to raise kids someday. I hope that I get to remember that in my life as I continue forward. And that I ingrain in them to always have situational awareness, because it's so important. Especially
with phones
and family around us. And yes,
everybody walks around with their phone like this. I mean, and you see videos of people walking on streets that they step into streets and cars, and somebody has to grab them and hold them back because they're so into watching their phone that they're not watching what's actually going on around them. And I think that in this day and age is probably the biggest detractor from people being situationally aware is their phone.
Yeah, certainly. Tell me, you were adopted, correct? I think I remember that from the video. So tell me a little bit about what that was like, and then learning that you were adopted. When was that, and how was that process?
So my mother was 14 when I was born. So she knew that she couldn't take care of me, and she knew that I'd have a much better life if she gave me up. And so I want to recognize her sacrifice first and foremost in that, because it's an important part of this. I was given up for adoption and adopted within a couple of weeks. My parents were actually moving. My dad was in the Navy, and he was from Iowa. And so when you're in the Navy, they do adoptions through your home state, or at least they did then. So my mom and dad were actually moving from California to Oregon and flew to Iowa, or my mom drove, my dad flew to Iowa in between to pick me up and adopt me. And in my family, you knew from very early on that you were adopted. As soon as you could understand the concept of adoption, it was there, because my older brother was adopted, I was adopted, and then my two sisters following me were adopted. So until I was 7, that was all we had, was adopted kids. And my two sisters are both biracial, so clearly they look different than I did. And so we just always understood, and until, like I said, until I was 7, that's how we got our kids, was we went and picked them up. We didn't have them. But we always knew from very early on, and it was, my birth announcement, I'm quite lucky. I was able to see one of my birth announcements. My grandma kept it, and it said, I wasn't expected, I was selected. So I always felt that, that's kind of a cool thing, that, I was chosen, and in my family, my dad didn't have his adopted kids and his kids. He had his kids. It was never brought up. It was never discussed. The only time it was ever discussed is if somebody was actually talking about adoption, and then my dad would say, well, we actually adopted, or, something along that lines. And once a year when I was growing up, we went to, they had a Christmas party for the organization, is Lutheran Social Services, that I was adopted through. They had a Christmas party every year in our local area there, where all of the adopted kids and their parents came together for a Christmas party. So it was really neat to be able to see other people relating to that and having those shared experiences as well, not just siblings, but also, people that we saw on a regular basis.
Yeah. Your parents sound like sensational people. Truly
Definitely.
saints.
Yeah.
That it takes a very special person to adopt someone and really care for them and love them like their own child, like they came out of their own womb.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a huge crux of the pro-life argument. And I don't want to misspeak when I say this statistic, but I do believe there's almost twice as many parents on the adoption waiting list than there are abortions every year. So there's plenty out there waiting for it. What do you think about that argument, that statistic, and what are some of the arguments against that you've heard?
Well, with adoption, there's a few things that have changed a lot since I was a kid. Mm-hmm. I think that now there is much more counseling, there's much more resources available, and there's much more research available to how children in different birth positions react with other. In my family, there were 5 genetic firstborn children. So a lot of type A personalities all fighting for that dominant position. And in my day and age, that nobody ever talked about that. There was no counseling. There was no, we need to deal with this. It was
no
just
research on it.
Yeah, there was no research on it. There was no information, where now there is. And I think that that's a valuable resource, because that is something that is quite important into how you mentally develop. I think adoption is really underrated, especially by the pro-choice movement. They so often is like, well, why would somebody want somebody else's garbage? And I'm like, how can you, the fact that you think of a human being as somebody else's garbage is just, it's awful. Yeah. It's just awful. And the reality is that there's a lot of love. Are there bad adoptions? Are there bad people? There are bad players? Of course there are. There are bad players in everything. Okay, that's just the reality of the sinful world that we live in. Right. But overwhelmingly, the people who adopt children are the most loving, kind, giving people that you will find. And if you look at within the pro-life movement, there are tons and tons and tons of people who have adopted children themselves, but also who were adopted, who know that they were lucky to have, been survivors of the abortion Holocaust. I'm lucky I was born, a year or two before Roe, so the law protected me. But that doesn't mean abortion wasn't available. It was just against the law. So it was definitely still available. It was definitely still out there. But I think that adoption is a gift for everyone involved. It's a gift for the child that gets a home. It's a gift for the parents who get a child. And it's a gift for the mother who gives up their child to know that there's a good place for their child to go. So it's all around a good thing. Now, there is also some research that talks about abandonment issues. But again, I think with the modern day and age, we understand that better. That yes, when I was a kid and I knew that I was put up for adoption, yes, there's some of those thoughts in your head. Well, why didn't she want me? Why? Well, I mean, with me, it's a little easier. She was 14, but some of my siblings, they were, 18 or 20, 21 years old when they were given up for adoption. So why didn't my mother want me? So there are, of course, those issues, but I think in this day and age, you're much more likely to get help for those things and counseling for those things and understand those things better than 50 years ago.
Yeah. Anytime to me that there's an argument that any circumstance, no matter what it is, that death is better than that circumstance is...
But you could have grown up poor. Obviously, you'd prefer to be dead. I mean, it's the most ludicrous argument, and that's why the pro-life movement has great arguments and great understanding of I think humanity, so much more than the quote-unquote pro-choice. I call it the pro-abortion side. And someone made a comment today that there's nobody out there that's pro-abortion. I was doing social media a little bit earlier, and there's nobody pro-abortion. I said, you need to come to an event in front of the Supreme Court during the March for Life or when there's a pro-life case being argued. You will find people, lots of them, who are rabidly pro-abortion. And they almost hate children. They hate people who choose to have their children. And it's like, and they say we have a breeding fetish or a birthing fetish. And it's like, that's how the world exists. It's like, it's so far out of rationality.
It's alarming, for sure.
Yeah.
I think
it's alarming that they don't understand basic biology. It's alarming that they don't understand the way human existence has worked for the last 8,000 years.
I think the reason that abortion is such a unique topic is because it is so innately, it's such a hindrance to our own society, unlike anything else.
Absolutely.
It is uniquely demonic, and it is a unique issue in that there is nothing else, in no other argument would anybody ever argue that murder is a good thing.
Right.
And to know whether you're on the right or the wrong side of the argument, all you have to look at, I loved what you said there, it's like we should start calling it pro-abortion instead of pro-choice, because you just need to look at who's using euphemisms and who's talking about what's really happening. Because pro-choice is pro-abortion, it's pro-murder is what it is. And I mean, they love to say like, oh, it's a clump of cells instead of a baby. Like there's all these different euphemisms to detract ourselves from the actual reality of what's happening.
And that's actually one of my favorite arguments is when in the course of human history has the side that has said one group of human beings is less ever been right? Were the slave owners right when they said that African Americans were not human? Were the Nazis right when they said the Jews were less than human? Were the Hutus and the Tutsis right when they claimed that each other are less than human? No time in human history has any group ever been right on that, belittling of another group of people to reduce their value to make killing them acceptable. It is truly horrific. And I want to go back to one other thing. We were talking about the arguments or the discussions and who's being truthful and who's being, dishonest. One of the arguments that I actually don't like that a lot of people in the pro-life movement use is, well, this person, the person that was aborted could have cured cancer, or they could have cured whatever, or they could have solved, poverty. We don't have to have some great achievement in life to be worthy of life.
All created in God's image.
We're all created in God's image, and we all have innate value in the fact that we are humans, period.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. And the other thing is that is really absurd to me is that anybody would argue with anyone that says that I'm pro-life on anything. Like, to say that you are on the opposing side of life.
Life, yeah.
Is, in general, no matter what the circumstances are, and I think that's the unique part about your situation, is that you were conceived in rape. And that's a whole nother argument that I've actually changed my views on throughout the years. I used to be on the side of, well, maybe should we have exceptions? And I'm still relatively young, so I get to claim ignorance on that. But there's a lot of people that will claim, well, we should have exceptions for rape and incest. Well, should we, or is it still an evil thing that happened because of another evil thing?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that whole argument falls apart if we're arguing that all human life has value. And it does. And yeah, I think that the exceptions are a way to kind of cop out and like, oh, well, we'll get most of the way there. Well, they didn't say we're going to end slavery except for this group of people. We're going to end slavery for people who were born free and rounded up, but not for the people who were born in slavery. You know what I mean? You can't really have it one way or the other. You've got to make a decision whether you're pro-life and life has value or it doesn't. And unfortunately, even within the pro-life movement, the most disposable, and I said this in the long-form video of what we recorded with live action, is like the most disposable. In the beginning of exceptions, every single list of exceptions starts with rape, incest, life of the mother. It's always us. It's always those of us who were conceived that way that are we're first on the chopping block. And that makes it really hard to feel good about yourself sometimes when you know that even the people on your side of things, you're disposable to them.
Yeah.
And I understand that there is a component that there was a lack of choice in how you came into being, but the fact that you exist, you still have intrinsic value. Nobody is looking, and this is the other one, is nobody is looking to force someone to raise a child that was conceived in rape. Nobody is asking anybody to do that. Adoption is absolutely a viable option, and and I understand in a lot of cases preferable to a lot of people. But we don't get past rape by adding trauma of killing your child onto already having conceived in rape. That doesn't solve anything. It adds pain. It adds another trauma. And I think that the most loving thing that we can do for women who conceive in this way is to, one, make sure that we're accepting of them, that there's never a time when they're like, well, how did you end up pregnant? Or, any of those kind of judgments. I think that, and I think this happens way too often with especially teen pregnancies and things like that, is like we start demonizing the people for an action, but in doing that, you're basically condemning the child too, and I think that's just so wrong. And it's really hard. It's really hard for Christians to get past somebody doing something bad differently than they did something bad.
Yeah.
And I think that's just something we're going to have to learn to change, because children come into this world in all different ways. And while some of them are unfortunate situations and maybe not planned, to say somebody is unwanted is just wrong. Yeah. There are no unwanted children. There are only unplanned children. And I think that's a key distinction that a lot of people miss.
Yeah. I think the part that disheartens me is that as you mentioned, especially on the conservative side, we don't have anybody that have fully gone to the full pro-life side of things. And I think when we lost Charlie in September, that was one of the reasons that it felt so personal to a lot of people, because Charlie was on the right side of, in my opinion, every single argument he made. And he never made any exceptions. He never said, well, maybe in the case of rape, or maybe I won't tell this truth because it's not the time. He always stood for truth, and he always went all the way with the truth, no matter how many people came against him or spoke out against him. And I've been fortunate not to have a lot of death in my life just yet. I haven't lost that very many people close to me, but I've lost a few, and I've never felt a death so physically as I did Charlie's. For someone I didn't even know, I was sick to my stomach for days. And I think that's because he was someone that had the heart of God and spoke truth constantly. And I really hope someone steps up in the near future and carries that torch, especially for the anti-abortion movement.
I hope so too. And Charlie was one of those that used a line that a lot of us use who are in this situation is, if I show you an ultrasound of two children, one that was conceived in rape and one that was conceived in love, can you tell me the difference? And of course not, because there is no difference. There's still a child of God created in his image. And I think that Charlie encapsulated that so well. And then also, I never saw him nasty to anybody. Even people who came at him with hate, he returned it with love and caring and logic. And I think that's another thing, too, is that so many pro-life arguments get attacked for being religious arguments. But if you look at it, every embryology or fetology book that you look at will say that human life begins at the moment of conception. And some people have wanted to change that to the moment of creation, and I understand a little bit that argument, because with, say, artificial insemination or with twins, is there a moment of conception for the second twin when the egg splits? And so some people want to get hung up on creation versus conception, but I think that's, getting into the weeds a little further than you need to on it. It's say conception, say creation, say what you choose, but the reality is from that moment, from the spark of life, that literally there is a light. They've shown this now, that there is a tiny little light that happens. From that moment on, there is unique and separate DNA that is a unique and separate human being worthy of value.
Yeah.
And
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No. The fact that so many people miss that and want to say that it's a religious argument. You can argue it from religion, that God believes they have value, or you can argue it from science. It doesn't matter. The arguments are still the same. It's still a human being. It's still from the moment of conception. It's still valuable.
Yeah. Something that Charlie did say that I have stolen constantly is that and I think Christian, whatever your belief set is, it should be this way. Charlie loved to say that every single one of his points was founded in, I'm paraphrasing here, but was founded in his Christian belief, but always defensible through logic and reason. And
exactly.
It goes back to the core of, if we're having more babies and we always are on the side of giving life to the next generation and leaving this world to the next generation, that should always be the goal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the world gets better with more people in it. It doesn't get less. It gets greater. And I think that all you have to do is look back through history and see that as we have grown, as we have had more people, the world keeps on ticking. And people have said, oh, we're all going to starve. I mean, they were talking, I think, in the 50s or 60s that there wasn't going to be enough wheat to feed people in India. And then somebody developed something new that allows us to grow more wheat more efficiently and do better things. We harvest more crops than we ever have before. We've learned to distribute food to places where it's not as readily available. humans will always find a way. And I think when we start offering up death as the solution, it's you just lose any moral authority that you have when that's your argument.
Yeah.
You can't say killing somebody is the best thing.
Yeah. Not only that, God tells us in Scripture that he cares so much for the birds that he always provides for them, and he always finds food for them and
exactly
shelter for them. And how much greater are we than the birds? So why would we of such little faith not trust that he would take care of us?
Exactly. He will send us what we need when we need it. And that's, people who say my prayers weren't answered. Your prayers are always answered. Sometimes the answer is no or not now, but they are always answered. And I think that's I think that's a failing of a lot of Christians, that they believe that if they don't get exactly what they asked for in their prayers, that their prayers weren't answered. And it's not reality, and it's just not the truth. And I think that we have now so many false teachers, even within the Christian faith. There's a pastor out here in Maryland, just across the river from me, who says that she never felt closer to God than when she was aborting her child. And she preaches that from the pulpit, wearing a stole that's branded for Planned Parenthood. That's not a preacher. That is Satan in a stole. And I think that we sometimes, when the new Planned Parenthood opened in D.C., there was a group of pastors who came to bless the Planned Parenthood. That's not Christian. That's not a preacher. That's the devil. And I think we need to start calling some of these people out. And, I would rather have you not go to church than go to that church.
Yeah. One of the things that I've been confronted with recently, and have learned a lot more about that I hadn't really considered very much before, is the antithesis to heaven is hell. And to only talk about what we should aspire to, and to never talk about sin and death and these negative things, are completely missing the point, and we're washing ourselves clean of things that we have to confront in order to seek truth and what's good and beautiful. So if you are ignoring the fact that abortion is happening and sin is happening in this world, and you just want to only preach from the pulpit about these good things and the love and mercy that Jesus has for you, and it's just a good feeling all the time, you aren't prepared to go into the battle that God tells us in Scripture that we're going to face as Christians.
Yeah. If you only pick the good things out of the Bible, you're missing a lot of the Bible. That's just the reality.
Precisely half of it, yeah.
Yeah. And the thing is that we have so many people now that are so worried about keeping the few people they have in their pews there and keeping the church, the building, alive, that they're letting the church itself die. And I think that's the difference that people aren't paying attention to, is that the church isn't the building and the grounds and the pastor's salary and all of that stuff. The church is the people in it and saving them. Yeah. And if we're keeping the building open and losing the souls, we're not doing what God commanded us to do. And it's really a sad thing to see, and that so many of these feel-good ministries are taking off. It's like, well, if I tell you all the good things you want to hear, but I don't tell you the reality of what's going on, it's like having a job interview and telling you about the salary and the benefits and all of that, but not telling you about the work you have to do.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not getting a full picture of what the deal is.
Yeah. I feel like that happens a lot of times with, specifically in politics. I have a lot of friends who say they're apolitical, or they just don't care, or they don't want to be in it. It's too divisive. They don't want to talk about it. And as a result, they don't fully form their views. And I like to make the argument that Jesus was innately political. It was the government that executed him on the cross. And the reason that he was murdered and that he was martyred is because he suggested that there was a higher king than the worldly and earthly king. So to say that you are apolitical, to me, sounds like you are not anti-Jesus, but you aren't striving to be like Jesus. You have to take a stance on these things because they cut to the root of what is true and good and beautiful. And in previous episodes, I've been extremely and openly critical of the state of the church today because we have pastors and people that want to call themselves men that won't bring politics into the church and talk about current events because they're worried about losing their congregation and people fleeing out the church. And I'm telling you, if they're fleeing out of the church because you're talking about politics and you're telling them what the Bible says about the current events that are happening in society, they weren't Christians anyway.
You don't have a congregation if you can't have a hard conversation with them. I mean, I used to refer to a pastor I had when I was younger, like before junior high, like elementary school age, Pastor Resner. You knew when you went into Pastor Resner's church, you were going to get a little bit of brimstone and hellfire, but that was part of the deal. That's part of hearing the story of the Bible, is knowing that, yes, there is a punishment for not doing the right thing. It's not just, well, we ask for forgiveness and all is, roses and unicorns. There is the reality that if we do bad things and if we don't repent, bad things are going to happen. Not just, well, you need to repent so other good things will happen. You need to tell the other side of that coin. And we just don't. And I think that is such a disservice to people. And I worry that a lot of people are growing up today and going through all of these years in church and never having a Walter Resner that gives them the brimstone and hellfire sermons. And without that, you're missing a huge chunk of what the Bible is telling us. And if we're not going to pay attention to it, just this week, there was a senator who said that our rights don't come from God. Now, this is a guy who's sworn to uphold the Constitution, and the Constitution says our rights come from God.
Yeah,
so
right?
Clearly he's not paying attention to a document that he swears he's there to uphold.
Yeah.
And again, if you can't understand that the totality of things is what reality is, you're not living a full life, and you're not preparing yourself for what comes next.
Have you heard? I want to ask you this because I haven't heard a good argument for it. And I'm curious if you have. A lot of the times people like to ask, like, if you don't have a religion and you don't believe in a higher power, then what is the moral grounds for which you stake right and wrong? Because objectively, there is right and wrong that's more or less agreed upon by all people, whether they believe in God or not. Christians tend to say that we get our moral beliefs from God, and that is what we stake right and wrong off of, is Scripture and what God and the Holy Spirit puts within us. Well, people that are maybe atheist or believe in a different religion will say that, well, no, that comes from the objective, like what's good or bad for society changes as the times change. And
that's not true.
Well, clearly, that's not true because you're killing babies constantly, and that's clearly not good for society. So what is the moral grounds that people take right and wrong from if it's not God?
Well, that's the thing, though. They're not being honest about morality changing. No-fault divorce is not good for society. It's not good for families. It's not good for kids. It's not good for anybody. But they'll tell you that because, that came about in the 60s and 70s, that's now what is moral and right. But it's not. It never has been. Homosexuality and gay marriage and transgenderism and all of these other things that we're now claiming are okay and claiming are morally right, they're not. They're just not. There is an undeniable truth of what is good for society, and good for society is one man, one woman in a loving marriage, raising children and growing them to be moral and decent human beings. That doesn't matter whether the Bible exists or not. It doesn't matter whether Jesus exists or not. It's just the reality of truth. And the problem is that we have bent truth to being what we find acceptable as a group. And that's not truth. Truth is truth. And the reality is that we know that killing another human being is wrong. We've known that from the very beginning. Since Cain and Abel, we've known that is wrong. Okay? But we have now decided that killing some human beings because they're inconvenient, because, my body, my choice, that's not true either, because it's not your body you're killing. If it was your body you're killing, then maybe we could make an argument that you have a right to do that, but it's not your body. It's somebody else's body with their own separate DNA, their own separate life. And we know that this is wrong. Even pro-abortion people know factually, deep down inside, that it's wrong. Because so many of them say, well, it's a difficult decision between a woman and her doctor. Why? If it's the same as cutting my fingernails off and it's just a little bit of tissue that I'm excising from my body, why in the world is it a difficult decision? I've never thought once about, well, what's going to happen to my fingernails? Or is getting rid of my fingernails wrong? It's not the same. And they know it's not the same. But they have to lie to themselves to convince them that it's the same in order for it to be morally, in their morals, acceptable. But they know deep down inside that it's not. It's just they have to know that if they're being truthful with themselves. But the reality is that we have so many people lying to themselves in this world about what reality is and what truth is, that it's just one other thing they're lying to themselves about. And I don't see how a society, how a world can continue to exist. Because if we keep denying the value of human beings, the next on the list is, and you're seeing this throughout Europe and now even in Canada, euthanasia for the elderly or sick. Well, their lives have less value because, and so it's okay to kill them. No, it's not. Yes, suffering is horrible.
Right.
Suffering is horrible. Pain is horrible. I've been in pain every day since the 8th grade. I have an artificial leg. And at some point, that leg started hurting during a growth spurt in the 8th grade. And I have had pain every single minute of every single day of every single month of my life since then. Are there days where I wish it would end and I would do just about anything to make it end? Yes. But that's not life. That's not reality. My reality is that I live with the pain each and every day.
That's an excellent way to put it. And I think it's actually fascinating that you brought that up, because just today I was reading up on the euthanization of elderly people and all people in Canada. And there are two routes that are, one is currently legal and one currently isn't. One, track one is people that are ill, terminally ill, or in these irreparable states where they will never be the same. And currently it is allowed for the government to assist them in their suicide. But starting in, I think March of 2027, track two is going to become available, where things like depression and other psychiatric issues are going to become legal as well and qualify you for that. So what we're going to have is teenagers living in Canada who are going through a tough time, as all teenagers do, and we're going to have 16-year-olds that are going to start committing suicide legally with the help of the government because they're going through a tough time. And
permanent solutions to temporary problems.
Exactly right.
And this is and I hate to tie it to this, but it's true. The transgenderism issue. We are sterilizing young people who are being permanently disfigured for a temporary mental state. And I think that allowing that to happen is a crime against humanity as much as any crime against humanity. And to allow people to kill themselves because they've had a bad week, a bad month, a bad year, I think is just so wrong. But we are also now less and less religious. These people don't have the hope of eternal life. They don't have the hope of forgiveness through Jesus Christ. They don't have the hope of believing that God is there and wants good for them. And I think if you don't have that in your life, it is probably very easy to get to that point. I had a brother who was 23 years old when he passed away. It broke my heart. And for the next couple of years, I couldn't go a day without getting teared up and sad. And there were times when I didn't want to go on. I didn't have a lot going on in my life that was moving me forward, and it was crippling depression. And yeah, if I didn't have the faith in Jesus to bring me out of that and to let me see that there was something better coming, I could have easily have fallen into one of those traps of thinking that ending all was a good solution to what was, as it turns out, a temporary problem. Was it debilitating at the time? Absolutely. Did I worry about my faith there for a while? Absolutely. But the reality is that if you have a good foundation in believing that there's value in life, you can't then say, well, only certain lives have value. It's just not truthful, and it's not real, and we have to have solutions for that. And death is not the solution. It's never the solution.
Thank you for sharing that. That's incredibly powerful. And I think it brings it back to the idea that, the argument that a lot of people on the pro-abortion side will tell you is that, well, if you make abortion illegal, similar to making murder legal, then it's just going to happen anyway. People are just going to do it, but they're not going to do it under safe conditions.
10,000 additional births in Texas would disagree with that argument completely.
Yeah, for sure.
10,000 additional births in Texas since the ending of abortion in Texas. It just completely blows out their argument. The reality is that we have allowed people, a segment of society has been allowed to not have responsibility for their actions. You know, and I'm not attacking women. That's not anti-women to say that. It's just the reality. We have taken women's decisions and said, okay, well, you don't have to be responsible for your reproductive responsibility. We've taken that responsibility away and said, well, okay, you can go, basically saying, well, you can go drunk drive, and if you kill somebody, that's okay because you needed to drive that night, and we're not going to give you any responsibility for that. If you said that to anybody and you were going to do that with drunk driving, they'd say you're out of your mind. But we've made it so women can go out and have relationships as much as they want to, however often they want to, and if they get pregnant, well, you can just kill your child and there's no repercussions for it. And there's no responsibility. And I think that if you started, I guess, forcing responsibility on people, I think you'd, see that the number of unwanted pregnancies would go down. And I'm very careful with that. The pregnancy may be unwanted, the child is not. Okay? That I think if we start saying that you have to be responsible for this, that the situation would decrease. Because, I mean, even according to Planned Parenthood's own numbers, this is through the Guttmacher Institute, 68% of all abortion seekers used no birth control. So this is not a failure of birth control. This is not tens of thousands of women being raped. This is not what they want to argue with from the other side. This is simply people not taking responsibility for their own actions, using the death of a child to cover it. And you can't be that kind of society and expect to last for very long. We've lost our moral high ground completely.
Yeah. One reason I don't think the rape and incest argument should be as prevalent as it is because it's almost a red herring. Because ultimately, it's like 1% or even less than that of all cases. And as you mentioned, it's the vast majority of all of these cases are just people not wanting to take accountability for their own actions. They don't have an agency mindset, and they aren't going to live with the mistake, their perceived mistake that they made. And I think it cuts to the core of all policy in government, because even if you go all the way down to like things like SNAP benefits and EBT, if we gave them, instead of handouts, if we gave them an agency mindset, and maybe a little bit of desperation would be good sometimes. That, hey, I'm not going to eat tomorrow if I don't go and get a job and start working or start a business and create value. Like, homelessness is another thing Charlie Kirk loved to say, homelessness is not a money problem. It's primarily between people that are on drugs and don't want to get off of them, or two, it's people that should be in mental hospitals.
Exactly.
And has nothing to do with money. It's the same way with these SNAP benefits. The vast majority of people that show up at soup kitchens they walk in wearing a $200 pair of Jordans. They're holding an iPhone. They drove their car there. They filled up their car with gas. It's not about them not having the capability to do it. It's about incentivizing them to go out and provide for themselves.
Yes. There's a couple of things I want to talk about following that. One of our biggest protesters here in D.C. is a guy who flies in from Minneapolis. He makes a living protesting people. That's all he does all day long is protest people outside of Planned Parenthoods. And he protests for all kinds of super liberal stuff. His name is Derek. He was lamenting how he was going to starve to death because his SNAP benefits were getting cut off. And 2 days later, bought a $1,400 iPhone. Oh,
it's so laughable. Like, I can't even...
It's like, you mean you might have to spend your money to buy food this month, not somebody else's money. But I wanted to go back to one other thing with the rape exception that I don't think a lot of people really think about, and it's a real problem. So one, you're going to have one of two situations if you do everybody but rape, rape, incest, life of the mother arguments for abortion. One, you're either going to say anybody that claims rape can get an abortion. Well, then you're just going to have people claiming that it was rape left, right, and center when it wasn't.
I hadn't thought about that one.
So then you run into, we just claim it, anybody can claim it, and you can get your abortion. Or you make it so that in order to get a rape exception, you have to report and prosecute the rape. Well, then you're going to have an entire generation of young men accused of rape who never committed rape, but in order to avoid the responsibility of having a child, the women will claim rape in order to get the abortions.
Which, if you claim is not true, you're completely lying because there's already, that has exploded, false rape.
Exactly. One of those two situations has to happen. Either it's open that anybody can claim it, so it's totally invalid as an excuse, or you have to prosecute it and you end up with an entire generation of men being accused of rape. Neither one of those is a good thing. And neither one of those solves the problem either. And I think that I lament every day that my mother suffered through what she did for me to be here. But I also thank her every year on my birthday and many other times in between, but I always make sure I do it on my birthday, thanking her for my life. Now, yes, I was born pre-Roe. The law protected me, but clearly abortion was still available. And luckily, my mother saw me as her child and a gift from God from the very beginning. I'm very lucky that way. And had she been older, I think she probably would have kept me and raised me, but she was 14 when I was born. I mean, she got pregnant within 2 months of getting out of the 8th grade.
I have a 15-year-old sister, and I can, only imagine.
Yeah. So, I hate that happened to her. I hate that it happens to any woman. And for some on the other side to say that we're endorsing rape or that we're somehow rewarding rapists with a child is just the most hateful, heinous thing they can say. I lament that rape exists. If I could wipe it out tomorrow, if I could give my life right now to end all rape in the world, I would do that in a millisecond. I wouldn't even think about it. I would gladly surrender my life to do that. But that's not how the world works, unfortunately. Because people would make those sacrifices. But to sacrifice the children on that altar, if you watch the long-form video that my latest clip came from, you will see amazing women sitting at that table with me. There are 3 women who conceived in rape, 2 who actually raised their children. One of them was 12 years old when she was brutally raped. And she kept her daughter and loved her daughter because it was her daughter. Her daughter was the good that came out of a horrible situation. And not everybody can do that. I'm not saying everybody is mentally capable of that. But for 9 months, to give birth to a child, to have something good come from the evil, I think is the beginning of healing, not the beginning of hate. And I think that that's what we have to look for in life, is ways of healing, not adding trauma.
I think if you're a Christian, while you can never condone an evil act, and to be clear, God never, he gives us free will. So all evil acts are not of his doing. That's not what I'm trying to say. But he will use evil acts. For example, Charlie Kirk's assassination. I watched as the people around, there was an amazing revival in this country of people opening their Bibles, going to church, looking back towards God, because that was Charlie's message ultimately. And God can use, whether it's rape, whether it's murder, or any other heinous act, he can use that for good. In your own story, an evil act happened to your mother, but ultimately you came out of it and you are impacting and making sure that these other evil acts, I'm sure that you have reached so many mothers that have decided not to commit this evil act as a result of your influence. And if that had never happened at that 4th of July party all those years ago, so many more evil acts would have happened because of it. So ultimately, I think we need to look back to God in every single one of these situations to further understand who's on the right side of this.
Absolutely. And so many people on my videos talk about, well, he absolutely ruined his mother's life. A 14-year-old girl having him had to have ruined her life. Well, you know what? She went on to have 3 additional children, 10 grandchildren, and 5 great-grandchildren. She's happily married. When she got married in 2018, her previous 2 husbands have passed. When she got married in 2018, I walked my mother down the aisle at her wedding.
That sounds like an amazing life to me.
Had she killed me, I wouldn't have been able to do that. I wouldn't have been part of her life for the last 35 years. My mother is an amazing woman, you know, and she's my hero. She did an amazing thing. And that other people in her situation are being encouraged or almost forced to abort, and often to cover the crimes of whoever got them pregnant, is just, it's so wrong. It's so wrong. When I look at the love in my mother's eyes when she hugs me or she sees me showing up for the first time somewhere, I lament the women who will never have that because they took the quick and easy path to not having that. And people say, oh, keep telling your story. How can I not? How can I not? The other thing, too, is that they say, well, you shouldn't be telling this story. It's your mother's story to tell. Well, after the blue-haired pro-abortionist in front of the Supreme Court called me an abomination, I made one phone call before I shared my story. I called my mother, and I said, this is your story as much as mine. May I share it? And her response was, as if it will save one life, share it as much as you would like. So I shared my story, her story, our story. Love that woman.
As someone that has a podcast, for me to be at a loss of words is tough to do. I hope there is at least one mother out there who will hear this and changes her mind.
And if one mother does, my entire life has been worth everything. That would be the greatest honor of my life, and in the counting of my life, if one baby was saved, if one woman was saved from the aftermath of abortion. On a balance sheet of my life, that's a positive. That's a worth it. Every day of pain, every day of work, every day of standing out in the rain or sleet or snow at an event, that'll be worth it if just one is changed. And that's a key thing is when at least before we did the recording of the long form video, I prayed that God would give me words that could change hearts and minds. And if he uses me for that, and that was successful even once, again, it will have been worth everything for that to be the case.
Mark, it has truly been an absolute blessing listening to you speak and getting to ask you questions.
Well, thank you so very much for having me on. I mean, every opportunity that comes up, I always say yes, because again, the more people that can hear that there's positivity on the other end of these things, it can only help.
Yeah. You were put on this earth for a reason, and I 100% believe it is to do exactly what you're doing. And I want to thank you so much because, like I said, with the loss of Charlie and the divisiveness that we have right now, there's not a lot of people standing up for truth wholeheartedly, no matter what. And I think you're one of those people, and I appreciate the heck out of you.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate you giving me a format or a platform to speak from. You're doing what I normally do is provide the platform for people.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that, and it's one of the reasons why I've spent in the last couple of weeks probably 100 hours online answering people, commenting on these social media posts, and engaging with people who've reached out with message requests like you did. I think that's an important part of, I could have just let the video play. I didn't have to say anything. I didn't have to do anything. But I put on there, this is me. This is my name. And I'm doing this, or, thank you for sharing my story. And then I've engaged with people because I feel I have an obligation to do that. And hopefully those engagements will drive the message further for more people to see it. It gets more hate. It does occasionally get me nastiness about my mustache, but it also gets me love for my mustache.
It's a great mustache. Yeah.
It's running about 10-1 positive on the mustache, so I'm
surprised
excited
it's
about
not a bigger
that
ratio. It's great facial hair. I hate that you lost the whole beard, and I think it's a great look.
Well, that's coming back in.
Yeah.
I grow that because I have, in January, I do the March for Life events, and I'm outside for usually 2 or 3 days on end, outdoors and in the blustery cold, usually.
Yeah.
So that's why I grow the beard in every winter for that.
That's awesome. All right, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I hope to talk to you again soon.
That'd be great.
All right, everybody else, we'll see you in the next one.